There is a moment in sports when everything you thought you understood about a situation gets completely rewritten. Not gradually, not through speculation, not through someone's opinion shared on a podcast or a take published in a column written by someone who wasn't even watching the game closely, but through footage, through a camera angle that existed, that captured what happened, that was simply not the one the network chose to broadcast to millions of viewers watching in real time. That moment has arrived in the ongoing and deeply troubling story surrounding Caitlin Clark's physical safety in the WNBA. And what that footage reveals demands that we stop, sit down, and walk through this carefully, because the implications stretch far beyond a single play, a single game, or even a single season. Before we get into what the footage shows, we need to establish something important. The way sports broadcasting works means that millions of viewers see exactly what the network decides to show them. One camera angle, one editorial choice, one framing of an event that in real time becomes the version of reality that shapes public opinion, fuels debate, and drives the narratives that dominate social media for days afterward. Most of the time, that broadcast angle is sufficient. Most of the time, what the network captures is close enough to the full picture, that the conversation happening online at least resembles what actually occurred on the court. But sometimes, and this is one of those times, the broadcast angle is not the full picture. And when the gap between what millions saw and what actually happened is as significant as it is in this case, the consequences of that gap are serious, documented, and demand accountability from the people and institutions responsible for getting it right. Here is what millions of viewers saw during the play in question. Caitlin Clark went to the ground. The broadcast camera captured her on the floor, and the visible context available from that angle suggested the connection was between her emotional frustration over a foul call and her physical position on the ground. Viewers saw what appeared to be a player reacting strongly to officiating, down on the floor in a moment that, without additional context, looked like competitive frustration expressing itself physically. That was the interpretation the broadcast angle made available. That interpretation was not the truth of what happened. It was simply the most reasonable conclusion a viewer could draw from incomplete visual information, and millions of people drew it. The footage that has since emerged from a courtside angle, captured by what appears to be a reporter or crew member positioned close to the action, shows something entirely different. Chelsea Gray made direct physical contact with Caitlin Clark's midsection during this play. Not a brush, not the kind of incidental contact that happens dozens of times in every professional basketball game as bodies move through space and compete for position. A deliberate and forceful movement that drove Gray's head and shoulder directly into Clark's midsection with enough force to put Clark on the ground and enough clarity that anyone watching this courtside footage can see exactly what occurred without any ambiguity whatsoever. That is not a characterization, that is a description of what the footage shows. Let that land for a second. Because this is not a rumor, this is not someone's interpretation of a blurry frame or a contested read of ambiguous contact. This is footage from a different angle than the broadcast, showing a specific physical act that was not visible to the millions of people watching the game in real time. The broadcast did not show it. The courtside footage does. And the difference between those two things is the difference between the public conversation that happened after this play and the public conversation that should have happened, the one grounded in what actually occurred on that basketball court. Now let's talk about the flopping accusation, because in the hours and days following this play, a significant portion of the online conversation surrounding Caitlin Clark's time on the floor was driven by the suggestion that she was exaggerating, that she was performing, that she was manufacturing a physical reaction for strategic purposes, drawing sympathy, influencing officiating, playing the game within the game in a way that reflected poorly on her competitive integrity. That accusation spread, it was shared, it was argued, and for anyone who had only seen the broadcast angle, it was at least an arguable position, even if an uncharitable one. This footage ends that argument, completely, definitively, without room for a reasonable counterpoint. Caitlin Clark was struck in the midsection with sufficient force to knock the wind out of her. That is what the footage shows.
And if you have ever in your life had the wind knocked out of you, in a sport, in a fall, in any physical situation where your midsection absorbed a serious impact, you understand exactly what happens next. Your body does not ask for your permission. Your competitive desire does not negotiate with your diaphragm. Your mental toughness, your willpower, your absolute refusal to show weakness in front of thousands of people in an arena and millions more watching on screens, none of that has any bearing on what your body does in the seconds immediately following that kind of impact. You go down. You try to breathe. You find out in real time on your own timeline that has nothing to do with how badly you want to keep playing, whether your body is going to cooperate.
That is what Clark did. She went down, she tried to breathe, she attempted to get back up. And here is the detail that makes the flopping accusation not just wrong, but genuinely revealing about the people who made it. A player who is manufacturing a reaction, who is performing for strategic purposes, who is consciously choosing to stay on the ground to draw attention or sympathy, that player does not immediately try to stand up and get back into the play. That player stays down long enough for the performance to accomplish its intended purpose. Clark tried to get up. The physical reality of what a serious blow to the midsection does to the human body made that process visibly difficult. She fought through it. She competed through it. And the people who called that flopping were either not watching closely, had not seen the courtside footage, or were engaged in something other than honest sports analysis. The flopping accusation deserves one more observation before we move on. Accusing the recipient of a physical act of performing rather than engaging with the conduct of the person who committed that act is a specific rhetorical move. It shifts the focus from the actor to the recipient. It reframes documented physical impact as theater. It redirects the accountability conversation away from what was done and toward how the person on the receiving end responded to what was done. That pattern has appeared repeatedly in discussions surrounding Clark this season, and it is worth naming clearly for what it is: a way of minimizing documented conduct by making the person who experienced it the subject of scrutiny rather than the person responsible for it. The courtside footage makes that rhetorical move impossible to sustain for this particular incident. The footage is the answer to the accusation. There is another element of this courtside footage that observers have noted and that deserves careful, precise discussion: Chelsea Gray's expression immediately following the contact. What people reviewing this footage have described is a reaction that does not reflect the kind of concern or acknowledgement one might reasonably expect from a player who has just accidentally made significant physical contact with an opponent. Now, let us be absolutely clear about the limits of what can and cannot be concluded from a facial expression captured in a single moment. Reading intent from one frame, from 1 second of footage, is genuinely limited as an analytical exercise. Expressions exist in context. They can be misread. They can reflect a dozen different internal states that an outside observer has no reliable way to distinguish between. But, and this is the part that matters, that expression does not exist in isolation. It exists within a season that has included the Alyssa Thomas throat incident, which drew national headlines and formal correspondence from 11 members of the United States Congress. It exists within a documented pattern of physical contact directed at Clark across multiple games involving multiple players from more than one opposing franchise. It exists within a league whose disciplinary responses to documented incidents have been characterized by virtually every credible outside observer as insufficient relative to the severity of the conduct being penalized. Within that specific context, that expression becomes one more piece of a picture that is no longer possible to explain away as coincidence, competitive intensity, or the expected physical nature of professional basketball. It is one piece, but it is a piece that fits a picture that the evidence has been building all season long. Here is the institutional question that this courtside footage raises most directly and most urgently. The officials who were present on that floor during this play conducted a formal review. That review was visible. It was documented. It was part of the broadcast record of the game.
A review happened. Officials with access to angles and information that informed their real-time decision-making looked at what occurred and made a determination. So here are the questions that the WNBA's officiating department and its leadership now have a direct obligation to answer. What did the officials see during that review? What did they determine had occurred? What standard was being applied when they evaluated the contact that this courtside footage so clearly documents? And why did a review process conducted by professionals specifically trained and employed to identify exactly this kind of physical conduct produce an outcome that the courtside footage now calls into serious and specific question? These are not conspiratorial questions. They are not the product of partisan motivation or bias toward a particular player or team. They are the straightforward, direct, and entirely legitimate questions that arise when footage from a camera angle not available to most viewers captures physical contact that apparently was not reflected in the outcome of an official review conducted in real time. The officials were there. They had information. They made a call. And footage that has since surfaced from a courtside position shows physical contact to Clark's midsection that the outcome of that review does not appear to have adequately addressed. The public deserves a direct, specific, and transparent explanation of how those two things are reconciled.
The WNBA's officiating department has not provided that explanation. The league's leadership has not issued a statement clarifying what the review determined or what standard governed the decision. And in the absence of that communication, the questions do not go away. They get louder, they accumulate, and they join the growing body of institutional accountability questions surrounding this league's handling of physical incidents involving its most prominent player that has been building since the beginning of this season. Let's step back and look at the full picture, because the context surrounding this specific incident is essential to understanding why it carries the weight that it does. Caitlin Clark has been the documented recipient of significant physical contact in multiple consecutive games this season. Each incident has its own specific circumstances and deserves its own level of scrutiny, but the pattern that emerges when you examine them together is no longer something the league can responsibly describe as isolated or coincidental. The Alyssa Thomas incident, the throat contact that was captured on broadcast cameras, reviewed by league officials, covered by national and international media, and addressed through a one-game suspension that was widely criticized as completely inadequate, generated correspondence from 11 members of Congress directed at Commissioner Kathy Engelbert. 11 elected representatives responding not to speculation or rumor, but to documented, publicly visible conduct captured on broadcast cameras, formally communicated their concern about the league's player protection standards directly to its commissioner. That is not a minor thing. That is an extraordinary level of external institutional attention directed at a professional sports league over a player safety matter. Then, in a subsequent game, Lexi Hall was elbowed in the face. Another incident, another player, another documented moment of physical contact in the ongoing environment surrounding Clark's participation in this league. And now, in the Las Vegas game, courtside footage has emerged showing Chelsea Gray making direct contact with Clark's midsection during a play that was already under formal official review. 3 incidents, multiple opponents, multiple games, a pattern that at this point has been documented with enough consistency that characterizing it as anything other than a pattern requires a deliberate decision to ignore the evidence in front of you. The physical consequences of this environment have been real and documented. Clark has missed multiple consecutive games due to injury. She has managed an active back injury while continuing to play and continuing to make WNBA history in the games she has been able to participate in. She has absorbed repeated physical contact in a professional environment that is supposed to have standards and enforcement mechanisms specifically designed to protect players from exactly this kind of sustained targeting, and those mechanisms have not responded with the consistency, the proportionality, or the seriousness that the documented pattern demands. The commercial reality that sits underneath all of this institutional accountability discussion is something the league's leadership understands better than anyone, and yet has somehow failed to translate into the proportionate protective response it should logically produce. Caitlin Clark is the most commercially significant player this league has ever had. That is not a controversial statement. It is a documented commercial reality reflected in television ratings, arena attendance figures, merchandise sales, sponsorship interest, and the sustained international media attention that has followed her since she entered the league. The WNBA's commercial trajectory over the past year has been shaped in substantial and measurable ways by Clark's presence and performance. That commercial foundation is directly threatened by a failure to protect her physical safety in games, not because of optics, not because of public relations management, but because a league that visibly and repeatedly fails to protect its most important player from documented physical targeting and responds to that failure with inadequate suspensions, vague institutional language, and brief press conferences, is communicating something specific and damaging about the value it places on player safety relative to other considerations. And that communication reaches to fans, the sponsors, the media partners, and the congressional representatives who are already formally engaged with this issue in ways that create consequences that extend far beyond a single game or a single play.
The post-game press conferences following the Las Vegas game were notably brief. In the middle of a sustained, serious, and publicly visible conversation about player safety involving the league's most prominent player, the teams and officials responsible for those press conferences chose brevity. That choice communicates something. It does not resolve the questions the courtside footage raises. It does not address the pattern the season has established. It does not satisfy the congressional attention, the international media coverage, or the fans who have been watching this situation develop across an entire season with growing alarm. Brief press conferences in this moment are not a neutral choice. They are a decision to limit engagement with accountability, and that decision has consequences for the credibility of the institution making it. Let's address directly the segment of the audience that has spent this season arguing that the concerns being raised about Clark's physical safety are exaggerated, manufactured, driven by bias, or motivated by something other than genuine, documented concern. This footage is the answer to that argument, not a partial answer, not a rebuttal that requires additional evidence to be considered. A complete, specific, visual answer that requires no interpretation beyond simply watching what the footage shows. This is not media sensitivity misreading competitive basketball contact. This is not fan bias projecting harm onto a neutral situation. This is courtside footage captured by a camera positioned close to the action, showing a specific physical act that put a specific player on the ground during a game where an official review was already underway. The fact that the broadcast angle did not capture this contact does not mean the contact did not occur. It means the broadcast coverage did not show it. Those are different things. The broadcast is not reality. The broadcast is a representation of reality filtered through editorial and logistical choices about camera placement and production priorities. When courtside footage surfaces that shows something the broadcast did not capture, the appropriate response is to engage with what the footage shows, not to dismiss it because it was not visible in real time on the network broadcast. The argument that Clark's situation has been exaggerated or manufactured is no longer sustainable in the face of this footage. It was already struggling against the documented weight of the Alyssa Thomas incident and the congressional response it generated. It becomes impossible to maintain seriously in the presence of courtside video showing Chelsea Gray making direct, forceful contact with Clark's midsection while an official review was simultaneously occurring on the same floor. At some point, the accumulation of documented evidence stops being something that can be dismissed through appeals to competitive normalcy or accusations of oversensitivity. That point has been reached. What happens now is the question that matters most, and the one that the WNBA's leadership has the most direct ability to influence. The footage exists, it is visible, It has been reviewed by observers, discussed in media spaces, and added to a documentary record of physical incidents involving Clark that now spans the better part of a full professional season. The congressional representatives who sent formal letters to Commissioner Engelbert were already operating on the basis of documented evidence. This courtside footage adds to that documented evidence in a specific and significant way. The league's officiating department needs to provide a public, specific, and transparent accounting of what the review during this play determined, not general language about the league's commitment to player safety, not diplomatic framing designed to technically qualify as a response while avoiding any specific engagement with the footage or the questions it raises. A direct explanation of what officials saw, what standard was applied, and what determination was made, and how that determination reconciles with what the courtside footage clearly shows.
The league's leadership needs to acknowledge publicly that the pattern of physical incidents involving Clark across this season represents a player safety concern that requires a response proportionate to its documented severity, not a one-game suspension characterized by outside observers as insufficient, not institutional language that appeals to competitive intensity as an explanation for conduct that goes visibly beyond the physical norms of professional basketball. A response that reflects the seriousness of a documented pattern, the extraordinary level of external institutional attention it has generated, and the commercial and credibility stakes attached to how the league handles it. The fans who have followed this situation across an entire season, the congressional representatives who formalized their concern through official correspondence, the international media that has covered these incidents at a level reflecting genuine global recognition of a significant story, all of them are waiting for an institutional response that matches the seriousness of what the footage shows and what the season has documented. That response has not come yet. The courtside footage from the Las Vegas game makes it impossible to continue waiting without consequence to the league's credibility and the trust of the audience it is trying to build. Here is where this leaves us. New footage emerged. That footage showed something the broadcast angle did not show. What it showed was physical contact, deliberate and forceful, directed at Caitlin Clark's midsection during a play in which a formal official review was simultaneously occurring. Clark went to the ground as a direct result of that contact. She attempted to recover and continue competing. The physical reality of a serious blow to the midsection made that difficult in a way that had nothing to do with performance and everything to do with what that kind of impact does to the human body. The flopping accusation is answered. The pattern it connects to is documented. The institutional response it demands has not been provided. A league that aspires to the commercial and competitive legitimacy it has been building toward, that has watched its most important player make history repeatedly while navigating a physical environment that has put her on the injury report multiple times this season, owes everyone watching a response that matches this moment. The footage is there. It is clear. It is not going away. And neither is the question of what an institution that genuinely prioritizes player safety does when the evidence in front of it is this specific, this documented, and this impossible to responsibly ignore. The answer to that question, whenever it comes and in whatever form it takes, will say something permanent about what this league actually values when the circumstances require it to demonstrate those values through action rather than language. That moment of reckoning is here. The footage made sure of that. What comes next is entirely up to the people with the institutional authority and responsibility to decide.